Hello and welcome to OT the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, and how to spend it. My name is Felix Schultz.
And I'm Andy Green. Felix, how you going, mate?
Very, very well. I've had an action-packed week of events, meetings, and regular work.
Been a busy boy.
Yeah, I think the highlight, though, happened just last night when I chatted to the mysterious Roman, who is, to many, the host of Fifth Wrist Radio's Independent Thinking, but to me, he's a friend and occasional watch enabler.
Is he one of your first watch friends?
No, I'd say he's in the second or third wave.
Okay, wow.
But
What wave are we up to now?
I don't know. It's global warming has made the waves a bit uncontrollable. But I have known him for like over 10 years, and he's, back in the old days of meeting up in pubs, dark pubs, and talking about, expensive watches that weren't as expensive.
SJP, is he wave one?
Yeah, it'd be wave two, professional wave one.
Okay.
I don't know. This is getting very arbitrary. But before we talk to Roman, we've been doing some various and interesting things. Do you want me to start with what I've been doing?
I'd love to hear what you've been doing, Felix.
Great, thanks. First of all, I did go to the Oris grand opening of their boutique in Melbourne, the first Oris boutique in Australia, in the Block Arcade in Australia. It's on Collins Street, as all good boutiques are. So, pop into there when you got a sec. Get yourself a tie for 65.
Prime location, how was it? Looks good. Luxury experience.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I caught up with some people I haven't seen in a while. It's had a lot of chats about rowing, actually.
Oh, of course. I did see.
There's an in-joke for the Melbourne watch people. You'll understand who I had a chat to. In other news, I've been killing a lot of time on my phone.
Yep.
I downloaded a game, which isn't unusual, but do you know what is slightly weird about it?
You downloaded it because of TikTok.
No, I downloaded it from Netflix.
Huh.
Do you know Netflix offers games to
No.
subscribers? So if you download it on your phone,
Yeah.
or your iOS device, I assume your iPad will work as well. They've got a tab of like games that you can download.
I did know this actually. Okay, so what game have you been playing on the Netflix phone app?
Well, no, it's a separate download. Like it's just I don't. You have to have a like active subscription to get it though. It's called Into the Breach. It's a sort of a really frustrating turn-based thing. Basically, it's like a little sort of like chess. Like you move pieces around and they've got a certain move, but it's very very puzzly, very addictive. And the conceit is there's it's sort of like your Pacific Rim situation of monsters invading a city and you have to protect the city. But it's fascinating and really, really addictive. If you want to spend some time on public transport getting frustrated, I highly recommend it.
Do you know what else is addictive?
What?
Changing your watch's appearance just by swapping out the strap.
Whoa.
You ever get that feeling, Felix, where you're just looking down at maybe it's a dive watch and, you need something new. You want to refresh it. You want to bring a bit of brightness back into your life. What do you do?
You go to artemstraps.com/artem.straps on Instagram, buy yourself a new sailcloth or perhaps NATO or perhaps loopless strap. It'll be shipped to you in exquisite packaging in record time. Possibly, I don't know, insured. I don't speak to me about that. And you can then easily put it onto your watch thanks to the availability of quick change, spring bars, perhaps curved.
It's as good as a new lick of paint. Bring the romance back. Fresh set of wheels. Just, re-spark the fire.
Good as a holiday.
Exactly. And of course, Artem Straps have been supporting Felix and I and OT the podcast for this entire year. So make sure you support Artem Straps, artem.straps on Instagram. Tell them you want a pink NATO strap. Tell them I sent you.
Yeah, exactly. Make it happen. Pink NATO for your 50 fathoms. Hey, Andy, I had a beautiful segue planned.
Sorry for ruining it.
No. It kind of works better this way because I also watched a movie.
Oh, what'd you watch?
I watched The Lost City, which is a romp, an adventure romp starring Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum.
You watched it. Okay, yep.
Have you seen it?
No, I'm across the premise though.
It's basically Romancing the Stone, which was a movie from the 80s, I believe, for people who were young. It was great. It was, as I said afterwards, pleasingly mediocre. You know what I mean? Like I didn't want anything more, and it
Yeah.
delivered on that.
Well, it's been getting a bit of praise in Hollywood for kind of having an older female lead
Yeah,
securing
I
that
mean,
younger.
that was nice.
Yeah.
And it's really great seeing Harry Potter uh, become, not Harry Potter. Like he plays the villain in this. He does it very sort of dastardly.
When you say Harry Potter, who are you referring to?
Radcliffe, you know what I mean.
Okay. All right. Good. Just checking. It's been typecast. You're the
Well,
problem. You're the
yeah,
problem.
highly recommend it. I paid like $7 on it through Apple. Like,
Oh, yeah.
maybe don't do that. Maybe wait when it comes to Netflix. But really enjoyable, and Brad Pitt was also hilarious. Andy, have you been watching anything?
Well, yeah, of your recommendation of the movie that you had not yet watched yet, you were talking about The Grey Man, so I watched that. That was my weekend blockbuster.
Did you spot any tag Heuers?
I actually did, yeah.
Were they well chosen for the character?
Yes, yeah. Spy thriller type deal.
Yep.
Yeah, it was good. It was actually really good blockbuster level of production, quite entertaining. You know, we talk about our friend Ryan Gosling,
Personal friend.
our dear friend Gos, and you know, he said how he wasn't really suited for Barbie. This was a film where he was well cast, and it made a lot of sense. It was good amount of action, good amount of killing, good amount of when they kind of weave the comedy into the killing,
Just the right amount of murder.
takes the edge off the the slang. But on Netflix, really good, really enjoyable to actually watch that. I don't normally like those big blockbusters because they can be hit or miss. Sometimes they just jam some big names in there, but no, solid.
Would you say it was better than pleasingly mediocre?
Yeah, no, I'd say it's like a 7.5 out of 10.
For a Hollywood 7, not like, this is the greatest film ever made, but for Hollywood blockbuster, 7 out of 10.
If you want to put it, if you tomorrow's Friday, you want to sit down on the couch with a pizza and you want to watch something that's going to be a bit better than good and reliable, this is it. This is it. This is your film. But speaking of Tag Heuer, Felix.
Yes.
They are, of course, again, sponsoring today's episode of O2 the podcast.
Love it.
We're going to talk about a very special watch that they released this year, Watches and Wonders.
So you said a bit better than good about the Grey Man. I would go a lot further about this watch. I called it the week I saw it virtually.
You did.
Perhaps I think this is in my top 5 watches of the year. I'm on the record as saying that over at Revolution and probably on the podcast before. That early prediction was solidified when we saw it IRL a couple of weeks ago. I am, of course, talking about the Tag Heuer Aqua Racer Professional 200 Solargraph.
Solargraph, you say? What makes this a Solargraph, Felix? What's special about it?
Powered by the sun, nature's battery. It's great. It's a solar powered watch. So Tag Heuer have teamed up with La Juperie to use a solar powered technology and integrate it for the first time, I think, this particular tech into a Swiss made watch. And it makes perfect sense. So the Aqua Racer 200 is sort of an adventure lifestyle watch. How big is it, Andy? It's about 40 millimeters, I think. 40 millimeters across, stainless steel, black DLC coating, rubber strap. We've talked a lot about the Aqua Racer, the Aqua Racer 200, so you know what you're getting. It's a really wearable piece. The fact that it's essentially quartz means it's very sort of a bit lighter and a bit thinner, which makes it, for me, perfect for that everyday, don't have to think about it, strap on sort of, go anywhere, do anything watch. Add to the fact that retail price of this is around 4,300 Aussie, I believe, but we'll get to buying it in a minute. The main show-stopping feature about this, aside from the solar technology, which is very cool, is something that happens at night.
Yeah, well, so it's got that blended case of carbon fiber with superluminova in the case and in the bezel. So you get this like lit up texture that almost looks like a green lava running through the bezel.
Yeah, and you can kind of see it in the daytime, and it looks like a marble tortoiseshell bezel. Right, it just pops off.
Well, that's what I think I first thought when we started seeing pictures. Oh, it's sort of like a green tortoiseshell, and then you see, no, this is loomed up. This is very cool, and I had one for a little bit longer than I was meant to have. I just stole it, and playing around with a UV torch, lighting it up, charging it up, it is just so fascinating to look at because it does have a generous amount on the dial, on the bezel markers, and on the actual dial markers themselves and the hands, of course. But then the mixture in the bezel is just gorgeous to look at. It is. I haven't seen much like it.
Yeah, and I think it's really smart. Like, it happens, but again, I've seen it on much more expensive watches where they have like forged carbon, cases mixed with luminous material. But a bezel is a lot. You still get that impact without the expense in a lot of ways. So I think it's a really smart use of it, and it really adds a lot of impact. But I, it is for me the icing on the cake. Like even without that bezel, I would still be really into this watch just because it is that. It really, I think, delivers on the purpose of what the Aqua Racer is, which is meant to be like an adventure watch. It's meant to be tough. It's meant to do anything. It's got
Go anywhere, do anything, as they like to say. 200 meter water resistance, of course. It's obviously very well built. On the rubber strap, which is really comfortable and quite easy to adjust.
Strap.
It's a great strap.
Um,
Hop on the website though, Felix, tagway.com, and take a look for yourself at how the dial kind of works, because it's sort of, you've got that what we think is the dial, and then the sort of that new movement, and the way that the solar tech is actually incorporated into, I guess, like a secondary dial plate almost, and it just sucks up that sunlight.
Like the top dial is sort of translucent. I guess there's a solar cell under it. And some quick facts for you, Andy. You can charge full charge in 2 minutes of direct sunlight. Also works with indoor lights as well.
Same as me then.
Unlike you though, it has 6 months power reserve on a full charge.
Yeah, no, unlike me.
Unlike you, absolutely great watch. Really, but the thing is, this is if you pop down to your local Tag Heuer boutique and say, "Hey, I want to buy 10," that might be an issue because this is a hot watch. I think everyone is really taken by this. It's sort of I would say the runaway hit of their collection, and it's, I think, going to be quite hard to get for a little while. It's not limited, and I expect they're going to sort of expand the range and the scope of the Solargraph. But first year they're doing it, new technology, new
movement,
things. They're probably moving a bit slowly. So if you can get your hands on one, do it. If not, wait. I'm sure there'll be more.
Yep. If you get offered one, or if you see an opportunity to buy one, just do it. Buy now, think later, I like to say.
Try it on. If you get a chance to try it on, it's really, really cool. It's really fun. Check it out at tagheuer.com. We'll link it up in the show notes, of course. And yeah, thanks Tag Heuer for showing us this watch and sponsoring the episode.
Yeah, fantastic. Felix, so you've got Roman. You had a chat with Roman, big independent guy.
Yep.
What are you guys, top line? Why am I going to keep listening? What are you guys talking about? Because I didn't make this call.
Understood. Yeah. So we had a little bit of a chat about his podcast. So we'll link up some of the greatest hits below. We also talk about why he likes, or why we both sort of like independent watchmaking, and we talk about the importance of technique and storytelling, and where that sort of comes from. Roman, if you would follow his Instagram or ever chat to him, is also quite upfront about not being a fan of Rolex. He has some issues, certainly not necessarily with watch. He's owned Rollies in the past, but doesn't like the where the brand is at, or how they're sort of, he sees them or their AD networks are treating people. So that's an interesting chat, and I think one that really resonates with a lot of people in 2022.
I do recall last year, the year before, him taking a slight liking to a particular yellow dial Rolex Oyster Perpetual.
He does have a soft spot for yellow, and I think it's
he broke his own rule there. I hope you gave him some stick.
Like, no debate. Like, everyone agrees they make incredible watches, but we sort of came down, again, spoilers, but it's a bit sad that it's no longer the watch that you can save up for 5 years and buy.
Well, I'm sure he's got plenty of great options. Let's just get him on. Let's just get Roman on.
Let's do it. Today's guest is one of Melbourne's top watch podcasters. He's the host of Fifth Wrist's Independent Thinking. His Instagram is also one of the more interesting out there, and a great place to discover some new watches. Roman is someone I also call a friend, a mentor, occasional watch dealer. Welcome to OT, the podcast, Roman. How are you this evening?
I'm very well, mate. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind words. Occasional podcast guest now as well, I guess. Lovely to be here. Thanks for the invite.
No, not a problem. So, cheeky first question. Knowing you, what was the last watch you bought? And what was the last watch you sold?
Oh, that's interesting. I might have to have a quick look. Last watch that I bought would be. You got to warn people before we bring that. Okay, no, I've got one. Actually, came last week. I should remember these things. There's a lot of watches coming in. Last watch I bought was a 1990s Blancpain Ultra Slim. Reference 7002, which is a bit of a cult watch. If you started watch collecting kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s, you'll know exactly what that watch is. That's the last one bought.
What did you sell?
What did I say? I can't remember what I sold last. There's always watches out. I might have to let me double check my bank records and I'll get back to you on that. But I definitely sold
Only the
something, no question.
Yeah, and that Blancpain, that's the one that's got like a black dial with some funky Arabics at the 369. Is that what I'm thinking of?
Yeah, well, it's the reference you're thinking of. The one I got actually is the kind of the rarer dial variant, which has the Breguet numbers, and it's a
Yeah.
black dial. They only made about less than 500. I think it's like some odd number, like 497 or something like that.
And this is a beautiful segue into something that I think is a consistent through line in the watches that you sort of seem to have. You never go for the obvious choice. It's always independent, watchmakers, undervalued watchmakers, or just weird ugly watches.
Mm.
I don't think that's a question. That's more of a why
That's
do
a
you think
judgment
that
statement.
is? Yeah.
Why is that? There's probably two explanations, probably three explanations really. So number one is that kind of what appeals to me instinctively. That's kind of a thing that I like. Number two is, I'm sure this will probably come up later, but I'm an average guy in terms of, I'm not a trust fund baby. I'm a regular person, so I don't have huge amounts of discretionary income. So you got to go with whatever you can afford, which is also interesting, which happens to be esoteric and slightly left of center or right of center,
Mm.
whichever way you swing. And thirdly, I just kind of what I found is the people who tend to collect those kind of watches are really interesting people, and you kind of get to meet them, and they, not to use a rude turn of phrase, rub off on you.
Yeah. What sort of percentage of that? Because I find it quite hard, and someone that is sort of interested in a similar aesthetic and style of watchmaking myself. Part of it is when I started to become interested in watches. Part of it is, like you say, what I can no longer buy the nice old Rolexes or the cheaper Pateks or anything like that. That's never going to happen. But I can still get early 2000s Blancpain. It's probably achievable. And also, I guess I'm asking, where does it all sort of, what came first, the chicken or the egg, the taste or what was available, do you think? Like, is what has formed the other?
Yeah, look, that's really interesting. I mean, I've never really sort of self-analyzed it as much. I suspect the thing that shapes my interest in horology and watch collecting to some degree is probably a little bit different to what a lot of other people have. So, I was born in the Ukraine, the country that still exists for now on the map.
Well done.
So, yes, thank you. Now you got to wave a flag for the war. Support the troops as
Sure.
long as you support the right side. But like I never had my watch collecting was formed by the glint off my dad's gold Rolex as he was sailing the yacht
Uh-huh.
through Lake Geneva. Like that's not an experience I had as a
You,
formative thing. So
were you given one on your 18th birthday? It's like, son, I'm passing it on to the next generation. Was that
well,
a
yeah, absolutely. So in my family, when you turn 18, you get your first Lamborghini and you get your
uh-huh.
first Patek Sky Moon. Doesn't everyone's family have that? I
I
thought that's
understood. Yes,
universal.
yes, 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 yes. I don't like to talk about it.
But so you kind of go like I had to sort of, and my pathway into watch collecting kind of came through horology and sort of John Harrison and navigation. So slightly left field kind of esoteric pursuit anyway. So yeah, that kind of, I think that has something to do with it. And also I think part of it is also, you end up pining for whatever you couldn't afford when you just started. And, when I started watch collecting, those interesting Blancpains, those interesting, I don't know, Alain Silbersteins, they were unreachable for me as a, recently arrived or immigrant, child of immigrants
Sure.
growing up. So you kind of go, well, I can sort of, the seed of that collecting kind of lodged back in. And now the independent watch scene I'm really inspired by the people rather than the brands. So
Yeah.
that kind of go, well, no, I end up kind of following what people do rather than what brands do. So it kind of also tends to derail you towards the indies.
Yeah, and I think that's true too. Like, again, we were talking just before about how, we sort of first met. And I've been having a few conversations recently about Peter Speak-Marin, who
Oh yes.
was a very formative figure in my own
Mm,
introduction into watches and the watchmaking sort of scene and culture and community. Like, back in the 2010s, I suppose.
mm.
He'd come out every year or so and he'd, do a roadshow with his, latest releases, and, we'd catch up with all the people from, Melbourne and Sydney, and that's where that was really formative for me. And, I would buy a Peter Speak-Marin watch, not necessarily because I love the watches, but more because of my association with him as a watchmaker and that sort of
Sure.
time in my life. So it's real. I don't know. It's a combination of nostalgia meets product meets capitalism.
Sure, absolutely. Which is the Swiss watch industry. Well, any kind of watch industry in a nutshell, right? In some
Yeah,
ways, I mean, I'm a huge yeah. You and I sound like you and I have very similar formative kind of. We've imprinted on similar eras, possibly watchmaking. I mean, I'm a huge admirer of Peter's work.
yeah,
The recent Speak Marion brand, not so much, but those historic kind of Piccadillys, enamel dials, just
beautiful.
outstanding watches, like incredible.
And this seems like a perfect time to segue into your own competing podcast, Independent Thinking. Uh,
Complementary, not competing, complementary.
tell me about it. Tell the people who are listening and may not have listened to it, or what you could expect, or what the sort of standard operating procedure is.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. Thank you. So yeah, look. So a bunch of kind of watch collectors and watchmakers and crazy enthusiasts in about 2020 started this kind of grassroots enthusiast based project called the Fifth Wrist, and it
Mm,
originally started off as a couple of guys talking about being disillusioned with the way mainstream watch media was covering watches. The kind of the overtly glowing, everything is wonderful, hidden paid advertorial, that kind of stuff. So they kind of wanted to start a website, and Alex, a good friend, Alex, who works for one of the larger brands, is a watchmaker. He sort of started this project. And the idea originally was set up a website. People could review their own watches. They could only review the watches that they own. So you couldn't have this kind of, I got this, I'm reviewing this because the company sent it to me. And also the way to review a watch would be you had to put positives and negatives on it. So then
mm,
it started off as a Melbourne-based thing, but very quickly it grew, very organically, but quickly it grew. We had friends in the US and UK and Germany and France and Austria and all over the place. And then the next thing organically grew was the podcast, where there's about 5 or 6 different shows where each show has a different host and has a different flavor to it. So one guy who's really passionate about vintage watches runs a Fifth Wrist show that comes out relatively regularly, where he chats to people who are into his similar kind of
sure.
fetish vintage watches. What I do, so I am passionate about kind of horology, independent watchmaking, independent books and things like that. So I run a sort of show where I talk to people who either make stuff, so independent watchmakers, collectors, people who write about these things. We are a non commercial, non-affiliated, no sponsors kind of enthusiast-driven project. So I think it gives us sort of authenticity and voice and kind of flexibility to talk about what we like, to talk to who we like,
Yeah.
and be sometimes naughty about it. But usually we're pretty good, informed but fun.
Top 3 episodes, or if someone sort of hit subscribe and wants to get a bit of a sense as to what either independent thinking or the Fifth Wrist in general is about, what
Yeah.
would you suggest is a great way into it?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask. So I had this panic attack 10 minutes before the thing. I'll show you a picture. I've actually written out. So I've done. So I think we're up to about episode 300 something
Whoa!
across all. Well, but the thing is, it's across all the different shows. Maybe
It's
it's
like a network,
280 or
isn't it?
something. But the thing is, because it's so many of us, because it's 5 or 6 different shows, the advantage of that is every show is quite unique and has its own flavor and has its own
Mm,
style. But also, there's less pressure to push an episode out because you have to. It's not like, oh shit, it's big. it's been
Yeah.
2 weeks. I need, it's
Yeah.
second
Yeah.
Tuesday
Yeah.
of the month.
Someone else
So
is carrying the weight.
exactly right. So, but look, it's how do you, it's easier to pick your favorite child than to pick your favorite podcast guest, surely. Um, all right.
No,
Look,
I've
I'll
got some
pick three.
definite
No,
favorites.
I'll pick three. Come on. I won't ask you which is your favorite child. We both know who that is, so that's fine. So look, I'll pick three. I'll pick three semi at random, but also I think because they represent really good stuff. So the latest episode would be actually really good. So the latest episode of the Independent Thinking Show that just came out is with Brittany Nicole Cox. She's at Nico
Oh,
Curia
yes.
on Instagram. She's
You know,
incredible. She's amazing. She's a
yeah,
horological restorer. She works in automata. She's an engine turner. She's like a dynamo, amazing craftsperson, amazing storyteller, fantastic person. It blows my
she's been
mind.
on my long list, my OT long list, of
She's
guests
great.
for a long time. And she
So
was in, people listening might have seen her in that movie, Keeper of Time.
yep. And that's a definitely great movie to watch. So, and you guys had the director, you had Michael on the show, who I was thinking about inviting on the show. And then I'm like, well, he's been on a Melbourne-based watch podcast recently. So I'll give him a bit of a rest. But that was a great episode, by the way, mind you. So
Thank you,
that
thank
was
you,
good.
thank you.
So Brittany Nicole Cox, she was great. That's the latest episode. Definitely worth listening to. Let's do a bit of contrast. We had maybe we'll pick a random one. Dave Brailsford from Garrick Watches.
Oh,
We had
nice.
Dave on the show. So Garrick is an independent watch brand based in the UK, doing some really cool, affordable. Whenever we talk watches, inverted commas, but relatively affordable for what you get. Tremendous watches, like
Mm,
really built with love, built with care. They're just moving up to in-house movements now. To date, they've been using kind of Unitas 6497 that they've kind
sure,
of
sure.
reworked. So really good. So, and he's like a wonderful, he's the perfect independent thinking show guest, right?
Yeah,
Passionate, well-informed, pure enthusiast, likes a drink. That's not a prerequisite, but that does help. But
it
also like
helps.
really honest and has a really not jaundiced, but really honest view of the industry. And I love
Yeah.
that because that's the sort of thing we want to do. That's two. Third episode, I don't know, it's too hard to pick. Todd Levin. We had
Oh, yeah, right.
an art, people might recognize him. He did a talking watches a while ago. So Todd's an art advisor, incredibly erudite, clever guy. He has at least when we spoke with him, he has a 3-watch collection. His 3 watches were Philippe Dufour's Simplicity, George Daniels' Anniversary, and George Daniels' the other one, Millennium. That's his 3 watches. His 3-watch collection
Why did
at the moment, and you kind of go like, that's great. I mean, that's a guy who clearly he didn't just stumble into it. He came into watchmaking through this story with his father,
yeah.
who had a Citizen. It was just a really lovely way to kind of get introduced into horology. But there's way more. We can pick an Aussie. If I can do an honor at 4th place?
Please, 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 please.
There's an episode for our Aussie listeners with Ruben Scoots, who's a independent watchmaker, self-trained, based in Canberra, Australia's most fun city, for those who don't know. But
Mm.
and it's one of those talented guy, really passionate, based in Australia, but really doing things the hard way with a lot of love and passion. But there's heaps more.
That's the biggest thing I've learned out of this is, so I follow Ruben and I've written about Ruben. I've never spoken to him, so I always thought it was Ruben Shoots.
See, I had to ask. See, I heard him being introduced as Ruben Shoots in a few things. I think he did like a radio show as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, and before I went to talk to him, like I fixate on getting people's names right. And I'm
Mm.
like, just checking. I'm like, is that true? He's like, nah, it's Scoots. I'm like, beautiful. Glad I checked.
That
So
somehow makes him even more Australian. Yeah, and,
it
another one.
sounds
Yeah,
like a
definitely.
nickname. Is that what you're saying?
Nah, it's
No, he's
Scootsy.
an awesome dude. Lots of love for Ruben. But look, there's so many guests. James Lamb's another one that actually that your podcast and our podcast had James on the show. Actually, I'm wearing
I think it
James's
was like
watch right
in the
now.
same week or something. We sort of,
Might have been.
yeah,
Yeah.
it happens. I don't get caught up on it. I don't think it's,
I usually don't notice. Like I usually, because I sort of anyway, it's not. We don't even need to go that far. I tend to just kind of, you kind of plow your own, whatever the
Yes,
complete the
exactly.
sentence,
Yeah,
furrow or
yeah,
something. That
yeah.
sounds rude.
Stay in your lane is
Stay in your
maybe
lane. Thank you
the
so
less
much. See,
agricultural
English is not
version
my
of
first language. You're much better at this than I am.
it. And it's interesting. So even with those examples, you've picked a range of. It seems to be a combination of the story of the brand and the technicality of what they make. Is
Yeah,
there? Do you find yourself drawn to one over the other?
I think that's evolved. So I think my watch collecting, kind of what I value in a watch, has changed over time. So when I started collecting, one of the things I really wanted to do was trying to experience as many complications as possible.
Mm,
Like a watch with as many dials as you could, sub dials as you could put on it, was like,
mm,
was what really inspired me. And I was really trying to understand how each complication worked and what everything meant, and what the difference between a telemeter scale and a tachometer scale and a pulsation scale. And if you can put all three in one watch, you would make a Patek Philippe anniversary piece that no one can read, but it looks pretty cool, right? Like that kind of
sure.
stuff. But then, as I kind of, as I get a little bit more down this path, I'm actually really interested in the stories. And it's not even, I'm interested in craftspeople. So I'm not a technical person. I can't make anything. I'm not a handyman. I
Yep.
don't have that brain that kind of just absorbs a manual skill.
Yep.
So I get blown away by people who dedicate their life to a particular thing, whether it's, you know, strap making, violin making, or making watches. So what
Yep.
I'm actually passionate about, and the reason kind of I started this podcast with independent thinking, or I got Alex and Alex, the watch regulator at Fifth Wrist, kind of convinced me into starting a show. He's like, just talk to people you want to talk to about stuff you want to talk about. And that's
Yep.
actually the greatest license to contact people I admire, to say, I don't want to bother you for a conversation if it's just for me, but I'm actually doing this podcast. So I think I
Mm.
find it interesting. I know for sure my mum listens, so she'll find it interesting.
My mum
Then
listens as well.
hopefully other people find it as well. And it's so that what appeals to me is the people behind the things they make, or the
And
things they're interested in.
that really resonates with me as well. Like you, I have no actual ability, so when the revolution comes, you and me, I suspect, are both fairly useless.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
but but I appreciate that craft, and that reminds me of someone that we've spoken about before, and I happen to know you have one of their watches, the lovely J.N. Shapiro
Oh yes.
uh,
Yep.
from California, who does incredible things with
Mm,
engine turning,
mm.
and brings back. I don't know if it's that sort of narrative of saving crafts from the brink of extinction, or bringing back, for Shapiro, there's certainly a lot of that about that, bringing watchmaking back to America.
Mm.
Um, or is it just because it's a nice watch, because it's pretty?
I'm I and, it's the former rather than the latter. The
Mm,
just pretty doesn't really interest me as much as how it's made, or how well it's made, or why it's actually not even how it's made, but why it's made is actually more
okay.
important to me. Because pretty is relatively easy to achieve, right?
Yep.
Because you just, particularly in the current kind of social media, you can take the pulse of what the collectors are going for, whether it's enamel dial, engine turn, or
Yep.
whatever. Like blue dial, Tiffany blue dial is a perfect example, right?
Sure. Sure. Sure.
So making something pretty is relatively easy. What I'm actually interested in is why you're doing it in the first place. Because I've been lucky enough to meet some really cool people, and talk to some people who are thinking about starting brands, or they ask me for advice for some reason. I don't know why people do that. And and they go, I want to make this. And my first question is why? There's already 10 of these things that look very similar. Why should your thing exist? Why should people care about it? And if the maker can't explain to you why their thing should exist, then it's going to be so much harder to sell whatever it is they're trying to make, sell, or do, right?
Mm,
And that's the same for straps. It's the same for anything, right?
mm.
Guitars, bags, whatever it is. Like, if you're making something but it looks very similar to something that someone else is making, why are you doing it?
Yeah, I guess to make money, to make a
And that's
living,
fine.
I guess.
And
Yeah.
there's a place for that. There's
Mm.
absolutely a place for that. But it's a less of an interesting narrative for me, right?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I've got two questions. The first one, I'm going to work my way up to the contentious one.
Start with the
As
contentious one.
no,
Let's go nuts.
no, it'll be good. As you know, we've at OT we're lucky enough to make a watch with the wonderful, beautiful people at Anordain.
Love them.
And it was really great. It was a great experience, and I can sort of, as anyone that's listened to us yammer about it, it's the people, it's the craft, it's the story, it's it's less
Definitely.
about the final watch than how it came about.
Mm.
If you were to make a watch in collaboration with someone, and aside from the fact of whether or not you would, who would you like to? And you've got to be reasonable. You can't go Dufour or
Oh, that's
Holter.
fine. He's too busy now anyway. So
Sure.
I've missed my Dufour boat by 40
Yep.
years, which is just lucky for everybody, including my marriage. No, look, there's a bunch of people. I mean, I'm reluctant to name a name because I know I'm going to miss out on 10 others who would be just as thingy. But what I will say is it would be an honor to make a watch. And also, let me just backtrack a little bit. Are we talking making a watch just for me or making a watch like you guys
No,
made
so
a
this is
watch,
it.
like a small
You're
series?
making, for whatever reason, you're partnering with a retailer, you're making the official
Series
fifth
of 20 or something. Or
Yeah,
30.
something like
Right.
that.
Okay.
So that's got to
Gotcha.
factor in. It's got to be,
Yeah,
they've
yeah.
got to be able to scale it. It's got to be, all that stuff. It can't just be, I
Absolutely.
like this guy, I want to make a one-off
Yeah,
piece
yeah.
with him.
Look. Let's go a few names. Why not? And I apologize in advance to the people I like who
They're not
we've talked
listening to
about stuff,
this.
and I don't mention you, but it would really depend on I think depends on the price, right? So
Sure.
there are really cool indie brands at just about every price level. So if we go, $680, let's talk Helios, right? Huge respect for Helios. If I could get Jason to make a series, I would just do it now, and
Yeah.
I've got it on record, but
We'd be there with you. Can we do
yeah,
it like a little joint one?
absolutely. Yeah, we can start putting, I'm sure we can we'll do pre-orders now. I'm sure you and I can just ring up 10 people off our phone while we're on air and get it
Right?
done.
The link's in the show notes. They'll be all gone by the time you.
Jason, if you're listening, and we know you do, just get in touch. Actually, Jason already knows what color dial I want because we've talked about this, but I'm letting him in peace. So so Helios would be a perfect example. It's a one-man brand. The guy is pure passion, pure love, does incredible work at $670, I think the Universal was, or whatever it was, right? So then you go, that's great. We'll go slightly higher. Anordain are fantastic. So I was really excited that you guys partnered with them. Brilliant. I'm lucky enough to have a watch. Actually, I've got 2 watches by Anordain. I was lucky enough to order mine when you could still get stuff customized very early in their process. So I've got an Aussie Gold enamel dial, which I'm very happy with.
Is that
but
yellow?
Yellow. Yeah. Daffodil. We'll go with. I think we've rebranded the Daffodil dial. That seems to be my fetish now. So Anordain would be perfect for that. Moving slightly higher, I don't know. Garrick would be amazing. They do great work. Dave and his team, really passionate, really hands-on. And you could get, particularly with their basic movements, which they've just discontinued, like the Norfolk or whatever, it was like $2,500, £2,500. But and then and we could keep doing that slightly higher. No, Trilob with Gautier, which would be double that, and you just keep going all the way up and up and up until you end up, I don't know, with David Walter, who's this amazing clock and watchmaker who's originally born in Perth, now lives in California, probably in the top 3 clockmakers in the world right now.
Really?
David Walter's amazing. Hi, David.
Into clocks.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I'm talking to a couple of people who are clockmakers. The problem, I don't know how about you, but one of the pitfalls of being a podcast host is you get to talk to really talented people about stuff that they're making and that they're really passionate about, and it becomes progressively harder to kind of not fall in love with every guest or with everything that they do. At least I find that's a pitfall. So I got to stop talking to people.
Look, I've got guests that I'd happily never speak to again.
Sure. Well, me obviously, because but that's fine. We need to do this for contractual reasons, and that will be done. But just think of you got to survive this, mate. Yes, it's another 4 hours, and we'll be done.
4 hours. So the contentious question, and this is one.
Please.
whenever I talk to you, or whenever I listen to your podcasts, or even, read your comments on Instagram, there's a common through point, which is a dislike of Rolex,
Mm.
the world's preeminent high quality commercially produced watch company.
Mm.
Why?
Sure, happy. But yeah, look, I've sort of become known as a bit arrogant, but I have become kind of. It has
I would have
been
said
noted.
contrarian.
My disdain for the crown has been noted. There's a couple of reasons for that. So let's deal with kind of the controversial. Like, Rolex makes a great watch, undoubtedly. It's not even up for discussion. They make a fantastic watch, no question, right? But so
Mhm.
do lots of other companies. So my issue with the Rolex is we said we could swear on this thing, right? Well, okay,
Yeah, sure.
is the bullshit that surrounds the miasma of exclusivity, hype, and all of that surrounds the brand. That's one thing,
Yep.
and we can argue about how much the brand is responsible for that itself and how much is everything else around it. So that's one thing. I dislike miasma of bullshit that permeates that.
Yep.
And number two, I do not respect a company that treats its customers with utter disdain or allows its own retail partners to treat their own customers with utter disdain, right? So
Yeah, right.
you cannot you can't treat you can't treat your customers that badly if you make a mass produced product. And I don't care how much demand there is on the side, like that will wax and wane. And you and I, Felix, you and I have been collecting watches or been interested in watches long enough to see demand go up and down in a brand,
Mm.
and all of that, right? So if you make a mass produced product, and particularly if you're selling a luxury product, and luxury, I'm doing inverted commas here, luxury because it costs a lot, but it's not exclusive. You
Mm.
cannot treat your customers badly. And I say this as a regular guy, right? So I'm not a VIP client. I will never be a VIP client because I'm never going to spend enough in Rolex at a Rolex AD to become a VIP client. But
Mm.
nor do I aspire to be one just because I refuse to be treated that badly or to be allowed to be treated badly. So that's my kind of problem with Rolex, is that the watches are great, undeniably.
Yeah.
I will be the first to say it. If you buy it at retail and you only want one watch, and
Great watch.
and you want to be a realist, and you're a real estate agent, or you're a lawyer that needs to be seen as successful, and the Rolex has been attached to that kind of branding. Get a Rolex. You'll love it. It'll be fine. It'll work well. No problem. I have no issue with it. It's a great watch. But in my head, Rolex, at some point, Rolex and Doxa were the same company. So it's same companies. They were the same size. They were the
Yeah.
same price bracket.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yes, Rolex has evolved, and I get all of that. But it's a tool watch. Let's not lose sight of that. And until they start improving their customer service or making sure their ADs improve customer service, I'm not interested. Not
Yeah.
interested at
Yeah.
all.
That's what I agree with a lot of that. Have you ever owned a Rolex out of interest? Like back
Yeah,
in the
I
day?
have. I have. It's fine. It's a great watch, but it
Yeah.
was, for me, it's kind of like it's kind of the not the platonic ideal, but it's like if you buy a picture frame, there's often like a sample photo of like a nondescript
A
person.
happy couple or something.
Yeah, or like a random. It's often like a white man, middle aged, kind of conventionally
Chisel
good
jaw.
looking.
Yeah.
I don't know, like Keir Starmer for our UK listeners. It's that kind of the bland kind of Anglo male kind of picture. So to me, that's what a Rolex is.
The
It's
equivalent.
a what it's a kind of it's an example of a
It's the
watch on your
default.
wrist. Yeah, it's a default. It's a default
Yeah.
setting of what. It's
So
great. It's made well, but it's just not It's not interesting enough to be that hot, if you know what I mean.
two things about that. A few things I find very interesting. One, yeah, undeniably great product, and I don't think anyone can. It's
100%.
I find it fascinating that the brand seems to operate on two levels. The one is the marketing machine, which is very, very
Yeah,
good at its job, undeniably.
for sure.
And the other is the watchmaking machine, which if you're going to make a watch that is, timeless,
Hmm.
excuse the pun, and,
Yeah.
will last and serve everyone well in the best conditions, it's an incredible thing.
Hmm.
What I do find sad about it, and I think a lot of this is sort of it benefits Rolex in some ways to have the brand image that they have at the moment. I imagine they're very, very concerned about people that are unhappy with their boutique experiences. I genuinely think that, but I don't know what they can do about it.
I don't believe that at all.
I think they'd be concerned about it. I don't know what they could do about it while maintaining their brand position and all that sort of stuff. The thing that I find most sad about it is you sort of touched on it. The story of Rolex and the positioning of Rolex is, you celebrate a milestone, you have
Hmm.
a great watch, and that's no longer possible.
No.
Like you hear stories of people going, "My dad turned 40. I wanted to get him a Datejust."
Hmm.
Or your dad turned 40. You're buying Datejust at a very young age. My dad turned 50. Whatever it
Hey,
is.
how do you know what
Uh,
William Massena was buying back in the early 80s? How dare you? Hi, William. Big fans.
um,
Love the guy. Love it. Well, he was the one who told the story of like, buying his first Rolex at age 12 or
sure.
something. So that's why I'm
Swiss,
like projecting to his dad's 40th.
Swiss kids hit different.
For sure.
Um,
Sorry, I
But
interrupted
yeah,
you.
I think that has changed, and I think that's a bit sad. Like that something that they built their brand on is no longer possible, and I wonder if they'll ever be able to get back to that. I don't
Well,
know.
I mean, I don't know, but there is probably a bigger conversation to be had about the whole point of this watch collecting or just being into watches. It's meant to be a luxury experience, right? Nobody needs them. It's not a functional thing beyond, it's an affectation. It's a pointless
Spending
affectation.
more than $100 on a watch is sort of.
Correct. Yeah, unless it's being, hand rubbed by virgins and made just for you and all of that, which is a whole different. That's like an artistic kind of thing. But a utilitarian luxury watch is a pointless affectation. But the people. So what I'm amazed by every time is the people who work in boutiques who
Mm,
consistently provide dreadful service. Like they should be, and I've talked about it on my podcast, the every person who's leaving the AD of whatever thing should be coming out and being made being treated like a pasha, right? So if you're going in there to buy, I don't know, a Tissot PRX for $600
sure.
or $800, whatever, when you walk out of the shop, you should be. They should make you feel like you're the king, right? Because then the point should be that guy or girl at
Yep.
their next job will come back and buy a Maurice Lacroix at
100%.
$2,000, and then
100%.
come back and like the idea is you make them feel welcome, but that's not the experience at all. At least not in my experience, and not in Australia and a couple of other boutiques I've been to overseas.
Mm,
You get treated like shit unless you're a VIP. But if your business, and if AD managers listening, if your business model is we're going to we are VIP based, that's a one generation kind of model of business, right? Because you're not having a
mm.
new pipeline of, you're not grooming in a positive way your next wave of consumers. So I find that really distasteful, because once again, I'm a
Yeah.
regular guy. I like horology. I like watches. I'm really interested in watches, but I don't like being treated like shit, or I don't like hearing stories of my friends and their kids and whatever being treated like shit. So it's not a fun
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to stories. I know people that are sort of saying that they've had that, like when they were young, like they would have a woman in this case who wanted to buy their friend something from Louis Vuitton,
Mm,
and they had that experience. It was horrible, that sort of pretty woman, negative type experience. Like they was just getting
mm,
a scarf or something, but then they went to Bulgari and they had a very positive experience, and they ended
sure.
up getting a scarf. But now this woman loves Bulgari,
Of course. Yeah,
and
you
that's all it
imprint on
is.
stuff. Yeah, you imprint on stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
we're all marketing and printing. It's all of that, I think. So,
Mm.
so that's kind of probably my main thing with Rolex is, it's not special enough for them to think they're that special. And you can put that as a tagline of the episode.
It's
That
I
might
don't know.
ease you a few
It's
listeners.
just I know, and we're sort of feeding into it even by discussing it in a
Oh,
way, and
yeah,
um, yeah,
cool. Let's
it's a
talk about it, I think. Yeah,
it's a frustrating
it's
thing.
really good.
Anyway, so speaking of discussing other things,
Hmm.
another thing that you have an incredible and very enviable ability for is finding odd, interesting, unusual, unheard of, incredible, and occasionally cheap watches.
They're nearly always cheap or cheaper than they have to be relatively
Hmm.
affordable. But sorry, you go on. You go on.
You know, that's I
Thank
don't
you.
think that's
I should have
entire
said
I
thank
don't
you
think that's
first.
entirely true.
My wife might be listening, so if you are, honey, they are
Understood.
always cheap.
Hello, ATO.
Yeah, that's right. Tax office, thank you. They're always cheap. They're always broken when they arrive.
Yes, parts for service.
That's right. Yes, thank you. Of course.
How do you do this? What's the skill?
Well, there's no skill. It's just kind of look, it's kind of it's knowing what I like. It's also kind of dumb luck in a lot of cases, and also it's now helpful that I know people who have stuff that I like. So I can,
Yep.
because a lot of interesting watches and kind of quirky, unusual watches don't really hit the market that often. Or at least
Sure.
they trade hands because often there's a very thin market for all the kind of quirky, weird stuff that, let's say, I'm interested in. Doesn't have to
Yeah.
be expensive, but if you own, I don't know, let's pick. Well, give me a watch that you thought of
I don't
mine
know.
that you
Let's
thought.
go something that's slightly less. Let's go Peter Speak Marine. That's a great example.
Okay, yeah, perfect example. So Peter Speak Marine, we talked about lots of admiration for Peter. There is no way in hell I could afford a Peter Speak Marine or a Speak Marine watch when they were out
Yep.
originally. Yeah, it's just there's zero chance, right? So then, but I like them, so I've kind of kept an eye out for them.
Sure.
And then that particular watch, the one popped up on eBay, eBay Japan. It's like eBay US, but seller out of Japan for like a
Right.
relatively low price to what I thought was, 30 cents on the dollar for what they were worth at the time. And I'm like, well, I'm never going to get another chance to buy one. So I buy one, right?
Mhm.
So that's an example of I know what I like. I'm kind of keeping an eye out. And if one pops up that's in my price range, I'll do that. I mean, I'm at a point now. I said I'm a regular, I'm a regular guy essentially. Like we won't say where I work, but where I work, and
Sure.
it's not
Sure.
exactly.
It doesn't
I'm
have
not in banking,
hedge fund
finance,
in
or
the
any
yeah.
of the lucrative fields of work. So
You're a
so I have to be
respectable
careful.
professional.
Yeah, so I have to be careful about kind of where I spend my money or where I park my money, which is why, the complimentary question, why am I always, not always, but frequently selling watches? And it's the same, I need to, it's watches out to allow me to get watches in kind of thing. So that's kind of
Yep.
the idea. I know what I like. It does help not to be interested in Rolex and Patek. If
Sure.
that's the one tip of that, just do, and AP for that reason, for a similar reason. Like they're just not watches that interest me, not necessarily because they're terrible watches or not or boring watches, and some of them are and some aren't. But it's just like they're not, they're not interesting enough for me, and that does
So,
save you a lot of money in the end.
yeah, and it also, again, that sort of thing of the paths less traveled. There'll be, however many thousands of listings to scroll through for those brands.
Yeah,
Whereas
absolutely,
if you've got an eBay alert for, I don't know,
something.
Hajime Ahsoka, that's going to be,
Yes,
less.
yeah, but the tricky part with that though is if you do have an alert for Mr. Asaoka's watches, not Kurono Tokyo watches, but
Mm,
actual Asaoka watches, when they do pop up, you have to buy them if you can afford them because they don't tend to hang around as well. Because there's probably three
it's-
people who, there's probably five people who have alerts set for them.
you're not going to
And
snipe at the last minute or anything. You're just
no,
going
they're
to
not going to
buy.
wait.
Yeah,
Exactly. I mean,
yeah,
if the
yeah.
price is right, if the price is reasonable, and people who buy those kind of esoteric watches tend to know what the value is. So what you're
Yeah.
hoping is that you've got asymmetric knowledge, that you know something that the seller doesn't,
Yeah.
which
So,
usually that means, that's kind of estate sales and I don't know, pawn shops or something.
so yeah, I guess that's knowing the market and being prepared to act on and having the ability, I
Exactly.
suppose, to
Yeah.
act on the
Yeah. Yeah.
market. Yeah.
That's right.
And do you find things at random sort of estate sales, pawn shops, odd online listings, or is it all the
I mean,
circle of
I
friends and
do.
eBay?
Well, it's a bit of both. I mean, I do. It's not as common as before. But
Mm.
like the best example of kind of a random esoteric find I can give you is an Anordain watch that I bought from a
Oh.
store. I'm going to say the store name, and you're going to laugh out loud. And the people around the world will know Cash Converters. You,
No.
yeah, yeah. You
Was
can
it
explain to
niched?
people what Cash Converters are.
Cash,
I'll leave.
Cash Converters is a chain of pawn shops
Yeah.
where they would be on a first name basis with the local police
Yeah.
constabulary.
Yeah, exactly. That's where all the stuff that gets
And the
lifted.
local drug
Yeah.
dealers.
Allegedly. So we need to put. Sorry, this is your show, Felix. I'm not sure why I'm
Yeah,
doing
all
legal
alleged. Yeah, 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 yeah.
illegal liability for you, but allegedly. Yeah. So that's a perfect example of. I have no idea how I found it or what I was doing on a cash converters website, but then I saw an
It's on the
ordained
website.
there. Yeah, it was on their web because they do have a
What do you sell
website.
it
Weirdly
for?
enough. Oh, I don't want to say because the fine people at Anodyne will be listening.
Okay, yep.
But it was
Less than
less
retail?
than. Oh, yeah, 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 definitely. Well, because if you're a cash converters and you
Yeah.
get this watch, you're going to sell it. You're not going to get retail because who is the Anodyne customer? They're not looking at cash converters, right?
Do you
So
yeah.
yeah, it was definitely under retail. But then I traded it with a friend. So what I ended up doing was I got that watch, but I knew a friend of mine had, I think it was a Helios. It was something that I was
Yeah.
interested in that he wasn't going to sell. So I'm like, well, how about we do a trade? So
You know,
you kind of do that.
did you consider checking if it had been nicked? I'm not,
Didn't
trying to.
occur. Actually, to be honest, didn't even occur to me. See, I'm that innocent that it didn't occur to me. I'm guessing.
I'd be very interested.
Yeah,
Like, because I
yeah.
can't imagine anyone that having an anordain flipping it at cashies.
But it came. But seeing as it came like box papers, everything. I think
Oh, okay.
he even had like a purchase receipt. Like it was like
Yeah.
mint, not maybe not unworn, but definitely not cut off somebody's wrist at knife point kind of worn. You know. Sorry.
Like, I
Hello
saw
to
a
our
very
listeners in
interesting.
London.
I was at the Bendigo cashies a couple of years ago, and I saw a really nice old Heuer stopwatch that was
That's the thing,
probably
right?
probably markety price, but it wasn't ridiculous.
Yeah.
I do wonder. I'm assuming they all just eBay, name,
I would
all that,
imagine so.
and
And
then
so it's
they'll.
becoming harder to do now. So those kind of, like that Hadinki story of the guy who went to, I don't know, Goodwill and bought a
Yeah, yeah,
LaCoultre, and sold it to Eric Koo for, 40 grand,
yeah.
40 grand plus a flight, plus a Seamaster or
A
what
good deal.
Speedy.
Great story.
A lovely story that just doesn't really happen. It might if you live in a small town. I presume if you live in a small town and there's one kind of op shop or something, it's possible that you might stumble on something. You're not going to find that in Melbourne, I don't think,
This is
unless local cash converters.
perhaps an insight into my personal life. I put some stuff to the op shop recently,
Yeah,
and my partner dropped it off, and including there was a few little watchy bits and bobs in
yeah.
there, and there was also a non-functioning old sort of, I'm going to say, quite a nice case mantle clock that had
Oh,
a
I love
deco
it.
sort of dial.
Lovely.
No movement in it. It had been converted to an electric piece. At some
Jesus.
point, I just used it, as an ornament
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the time was to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And as my partner dropped the box of our nice things amongst the terrible art and soggy clothes that are left out the
Yeah,
front of op shops.
yeah.
The old guys came out and they gravitated towards it. That 100%, that little warm-up table clock, the mantle clock, was not hitting the sales. He was going home with that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I
Uh,
must confess, my natural tendency, I don't mind an op shop because I like books and books are notoriously expensive in Australia. So I
sure.
love a secondhand bookshop and that kind of stuff. So I always, if I go past an op shop and there's books, I would always pop in and I always check, for that kind of weird glass counter that they all have right next to the register with
Yep.
weird combs and
You
silver
never know. There
teapots.
might be an Amiga in there.
Correct. And in my head, I'm like, it's never going to happen. But in my head, I'm like, I'm sure one day if I don't check, there's a Roger Smith
Yeah.
Series 2 festering away there. And if I don't check, some other bastard will. So
I want to
so
get an
I always do
Atmos in
that.
an op shop. I reckon an Atmos is achievable.
Well, actually, see, Atmos, there's a take home tip. I know you're a big fan. I'm a huge fan of an Atmos. Um, some of the best value for money, amazing technology, historically interesting, historically important horological device, an Atmos clock from JLC for sure.
100%.
Definitely must have.
So we've talked about the fact that you sell a few watches.
Mm.
Maybe on a daily basis, you might get it in and then sell
Weekly,
it on the
weekly,
same day.
weekly.
Are there any watches that you would never sell?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, there's
Okay.
watches that I have that I don't share pictures of because,
Oh,
on Instagram or whatever, or because it's like, I
the
don't
terms
need
of
to.
service would not allow it?
No, 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 not at all. It's just more like it's for me. I
Sure.
don't feel the need to share, and most people won't understand or be interested. And I'm just
Yep.
like, that's just for me. But no, there's quite a few watches that I wouldn't sell, unless It wouldn't sell. But it's always like, I wouldn't sell
You wouldn't
unless
sell it
dot, dot,
in the
dot, dot.
norm, in the course of your daily buying and selling.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, there's the kind of, you lose everything because there's a fire or whatever, and
Sure.
you need to, everything's for sale eventually at some point. But there's also, I can foresee, there's watches that I probably won't sell, but let's say if I get a once in a lifetime opportunity to
Mm,
acquire something
mm,
that's meaningful or whatever, that I think like, you know what, I'm never going to get another chance, and this would be really cool. I would have to think really hard about it, because I mean, like, I need to, at some point, this hobby for me now is essentially self-sustaining.
yep,
Like, I can't put more money into it
sure.
just because, at some point you kind of go, well, no, you've got enough to play with there. It's just make
Yeah,
it
yeah.
work.
Yep,
So look, I don't say never, but
yep.
there's a few watches I'm like, yeah, if you sell this, you'll never see it again. That's
And
that's often the biggest thing. I'll
is
never
that the
see another one.
criteria, or is it, that sort of exclusivity? It's not emotional or monetary necessarily?
It's a combination of both. Look, it's a combination of both. I mean, there's watches that are like, I'm I'm a sentimental person about a lot of things, but not objects to
Love
some
it.
degree.
Yep.
Um, because yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things you kind of go like, yeah, there's like the watch I probably will never sell is actually a watch that you've written, a watch of mine that you have written about, which is my Omega 300M Seamaster. I think
Oh,
you wrote an
really?
article for Time and Tide, I believe,
Back in the
a
day?
while
Yeah,
ago.
you're very generous in lending watches as well.
Yes, well,
Maybe
I
just to
mean,
me.
within no, within reason. You kind of,
Yeah,
you get to a point where, I mean, I'm at a stage where, if you have more than one watch, you're like, well,
just
somebody
sitting
else
there.
might enjoy it, and I think
Yeah,
they'll enjoy it. You know, go for it. And particularly now that I've been lucky enough to get a few watches with like independent makers, and
sure.
there's not necessarily another one in Melbourne, or sometimes not even in Australia. Like
Yeah,
a watch that, like, you had a guest, James Lamb. We
yep.
both interviewed, like, love James to bits. Very talented guy. His watches are amazing. His Origin series. I was lucky enough to have the first one, and when it would delivered, I'm like, well, there's no others around. He's making them. It's not like he's got a demo unit.
Yep.
And a friend in Melbourne was really interested. I'm like, yeah, no, for sure. Like, I've worn it for a week. It's lovely. I love it. Borrow it for a couple of weeks if you really want to. I know
Yeah,
where you
yeah, yeah.
live, so I can always get it back.
Yep.
And he borrowed it. He really loved it. He ended up ordering one as well. And I'm
That's
like,
great.
that's
So
amazing. To me, that's
so the
just the most wonderful thing.
the message here is anyone listening to this that lives in Melbourne, hit up at Times Roman AU on Instagram and just ask to borrow his watches, and he'll definitely do it.
Maybe he will definitely think about doing it mainly. No, for sure. Like, I'm very happy to meet with people and chat
Sure.
watches. You
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah. Yep.
that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, because it's some of those things. You can always find a Rolex to try on. You go to any watch get-togethers. If you want to know what a Explorer 2 feels like, or a, God
It's
forbid,
not that
Daytona,
hard.
you
Yep.
can probably find somebody with one, right, at a
Yep.
get-together. But if you want to know what, I don't know, a Jane Shapiro wears,
Sure.
or an Anordain for that matter, not
Yep.
that many around.
Or
They're
Paul
getting,
Gerber
I mean,
Synchron.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that's the best part of watch collecting, I think, is just meeting
Love it.
people, and yeah, that sort of stuff.
Love it, love it, love it. And Roman, as you know, we are wrapping up our allotted time.
Mm,
And as is a tradition on our podcast, I would like to ask you for recommendations. And you may have done some pre thinking of this, but I also want to ask you a bonus specific one.
okay.
You have a sideline in watch literature. Uh,
Yes.
what book or yeah, I'm going to say book. Should someone read or get or have a look at about watches that will make their lives better? That isn't Watchmaking by Georgia Daniels.
Sure, that's fine. I mean, watchmaking for George Andrews is great, but only mostly if you really want to make a watch yourself. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
not the easiest of
I'm not.
reads, just as a conversational sort of thing. Um, thank you for springing this on me. I
Mhm.
do love a horological book. I do sort of collect them. I do read them. Probably the one I would recommend, which is really, really good, and also happens to be, I'm pretty sure you've met this person. You might have interviewed them as well. Ryan Schmidt's book, The Wristwatch Handbook.
I know it. I've never met him or
Oh,
interviewed him.
okay. For some reason, lovely guy. So I did so if Felix and Andy haven't interviewed him on this podcast, check out Fifth Wrist Independent Thinking. There's an episode with Ryan. I think it was my episode number 2 or something like that.
Well
So
done.
forbid all the if I was a bit nervous or whatever, or the audio's crap, just go past it. The content's good. The wristwatch handbook is superb. As if you're interested in watches and you want to understand how they work, you want to see some really cool pictures of all different complications. It's very brand agnostic. I think it's like 400 photos, 300 brands. Really good, and it's like $100 or something. So relatively affordable, possibly even less. Really good, well worth it. And Ryan's a great guy, good writer, just a top bloke. So that's a really good one to have. And then Watchmaking by George Daniels.
My go-to in this list, and I love it so very much. It's one of my favorite things. Is The Magic of Watches by Louis Nardin.
Yes, that's awesome. That's awesome. I have a
and did you have another recommendation? A regular recommendation?
As in not books or horological.
Yeah. What do you mean? How have you been entertaining yourself, keeping yourself busy, whiling away the hours?
I have a child and a podcast. What hours do I have left to while away? Look, I've actually been I've got quite a lot of friends in the UK. I've actually been kind of looking at the clusterfuck that is the Brexit and kind of their Boris Johnson sort of debates and all that. So I've gone back to watching Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister.
Wow.
It's a bit old school, but it's a show made in the 80s, I want to say, for our younger listeners, which is for most listeners, because if they it's absolutely worth watching, because that show has aged really, really well. Yeah, apart from the fact there's no female roles. But the content is remarkably prescient even now, and it's still very funny. Well worth it.
I have very strong memories of being bored to death of that as a child. And
really?
Wanting to watch something desperately on the TV. I would have been like 7 or 8. I'm like, this is so boring. But for me, it's sort of like for Australian listeners, John Clark and Brian Dawes.
Yes. And a bit of Utopia.
What's your more modern?
And a bit of Utopia as well, kind of that, Santa Cello. Anyway.
We'll link it up. Well, Roman, it is, as always, a pleasure to speak to you. Even more of a pleasure to be able to hit record and then, chat to you about things for a podcast. That's never happened before. We should do it again at some point. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and everyone, listen to Independent Thinking on Fifth Wrist Radio. The one and the only Roman Andy. He's a great guy, and very generous with his knowledge and time.
Love it. Interesting guy. It's cool to hear, another podcaster. It's cool to hear about his different kind of tastes in independent watches, brands that most people might not know about yet. So
I'll have to tell you afterwards about how much he got that anodyne from Cashies from.
Oh, can't wait to hear.
So, again, thank you, Tag Heuer, for sponsoring the episode. Thank you, Artem, for your continued support. Thank you, Andy, for just being you.
Yeah, turning up for 15 minutes.
Sure. If you want to thank Andy for his hard work and invaluable contribution to OT the podcast, you can do it on Instagram at ot.podcast, or you could email him. Not personally, I'm not giving that out, but you could email otthepodcast@gmail.com.
Fantastic, guys. And of course, leave a 5-star review. Tell your friends, tell your neighbours, tell your independent, collecting friends and family. We will see you next week.
Bye.